Marcus Chen stood at the marble counter of First National Bank, his 7-year-old daughter Emma clutching his hand, when the perfectly manicured fingers of bank manager Victoria Hastings tore his $10 million check into 4 precise pieces. The sound of ripping paper echoed through the silent lobby like a gunshot, and in that moment, Marcus felt the same hollow emptiness he'd experienced 2 years ago when his wife Sarah had taken her last breath in that sterile hospital room. He'd promised her he'd give Emma everything, protect her, build the future they'd dreamed of together. Now, watching those fragments of paper flutter onto the polished counter, he wondered if some promises were simply too big for one person to keep. "Sir, I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull," Victoria said, her voice dripping with disdain as she adjusted her designer glasses, "but this bank doesn't entertain fraudsters. Especially ones who drag their children into it." Marcus felt Emma's small hand tighten around his fingers. He glanced down at her bright yellow dress, the one she'd insisted on wearing because Mommy always said yellow was the color of hope. His throat constricted. He'd worn his only suit, the same one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, now slightly threadbare at the elbows. His work boots, still dusty from this morning's construction site, seemed to offend Victoria's sensibilities as her gaze traveled from his scuffed footwear to his calloused hands. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but that check is legitimate," Marcus said quietly, fighting to keep his voice steady. "It's from Meridian Industries. I can call them right now if you'd like to verify." "I've been in banking for 15 years, Victoria interrupted, her words sharp as glass. "I know a fake check when I see one. Construction workers don't walk in with $10 million checks. This is obviously printed on some home computer." Security. The story had started 6 months earlier, on a sweltering July afternoon when Marcus had been working overtime on the new Meridian Industries headquarters downtown. He'd been welding steel beams on the 42nd floor when he heard it, a faint cry, almost lost in the cacophony of construction noise. Following the sound, he'd found James Whitmore, Meridian's 73-year-old founder, collapsed behind a stack of building materials, his face ashen, clutching his chest. Marcus hadn't hesitated. While others fumbled for their phones, he'd administered CPR, the skills from his volunteer firefighter training kicking in automatically. He'd stayed with James, keeping him stable, talking to him about Emma, about Sarah, about anything to keep the old man conscious until the paramedics arrived. 3 days later, when James was recovering in the hospital, Marcus had visited with a simple bouquet of grocery store flowers. They'd talked for hours, about loss, about being a parent, about the weight of building something meaningful. James had lost his own wife 5 years prior. He understood the particular loneliness of single parenthood, the fear of not being enough. Marcus never expected anything in return. That wasn't who he was. Sarah had always said his superpower was showing up, for strangers, for neighbors, for anyone who needed help. But James Whitmore wasn't a man who forgot his debts. The check had arrived last week with a simple note, "For Emma's future, and for yours. You gave me mine back, J.W." Now, in the cold fluorescence of the bank lobby, a security guard approached, his hand resting on his belt. Emma began to cry, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Marcus felt something break inside him, not anger, but a profound weariness. He'd worked double shifts for 2 years, saving every penny for Emma's education, for the house Sarah had dreamed they'd own someday. This check represented the answer to prayers he'd been too exhausted to voice. "Daddy," Emma whispered, "are we in trouble?" Before Marcus could answer, a voice cut through the tension like a bell. "What exactly is happening here?" Marcus turned to see an elderly man in an impeccable charcoal suit standing near the bank entrance, leaning slightly on a silver-handled cane. James Whitmore's eyes, sharp despite his age, took in the scene with one sweeping glance: the torn check, Victoria's self-satisfied expression, the security guard, Emma's tears, and Marcus's defeated posture. "Mr. Whitmore." Victoria's face transformed, her previous contempt replaced by fawning recognition. "I didn't realize, we weren't expecting. You didn't answer my question, Ms. Hastings." James's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd built an empire from nothing. "Why is there a security guard approaching Mr. Chen? And why, precisely, has someone destroyed the check I personally issued?" The color drained from Victoria's face as understanding dawned. Marcus watched her mouth open and close soundlessly, a fish gasping on dry land. "Sir, I thought, it seemed impossible that, she stammered. That a construction worker could be worth $10 million to me. James finished, his tone glacial. Let me tell you what's impossible, Ms. Hastings. It's impossible to put a price on a human life. 6 months ago, this man saved mine. While others stood frozen, Marcus Chen gave me CPR, stayed with me, kept me alive until help arrived. This check represents a fraction of what I owe him. James moved closer to the counter, each step deliberate. He picked up one of the torn pieces, examining it with theatrical care. This man works 2 jobs to support his daughter. He volunteers at the fire department on weekends. He visits elderly neighbors to make sure they've eaten. He donated his entire tax refund last year to the children's hospital where his late wife received treatment. James's voice softened. He has never asked me for a single thing. Not once. In fact, he tried to refuse this check 3 times before I convinced him to accept it for his daughter's sake. Victoria looked as though she might faint. Other customers had gathered, drawn by the commotion, their phones discreetly recording. Marcus felt Emma press closer against his leg. Mr. Whitmore, Marcus started, you don't have to. Yes, Marcus, I do. James turned to him, and Marcus saw genuine affection in the old man's eyes. Because this is about more than a check. This is about the content of a person's character, something that can't be measured by the shoes they wear or the car they drive. He looked back at Victoria. Ms. Hastings judged this man by his appearance, by her narrow assumptions about what success looks like. She saw dusty boots instead of a hero's feet. She saw calloused hands instead of hands that saved a life. James pulled out his phone and made a call. Robert, it's James. I'm at the First National Branch on Madison. I need you to process a replacement check for Marcus Chen, $10 million, and I need Victoria Hastings removed as manager effective immediately. Yes, I'm quite certain. Please, Victoria gasped, tears now streaming down her face. Please, Mr. Whitmore, I have a mortgage, children in private school. And Mr. Chen has a daughter who just watched her father be humiliated and accused of fraud while trying to secure her future. James's expression remained stern, but then he paused, considering. He looked at Marcus. However, the decision should perhaps be his. Marcus, this woman just tore up your check and tried to have you arrested. What do you think should happen? Every eye in the bank turned to Marcus. Emma looked up at her father, and in that moment, he thought of Sarah. He thought of what he wanted his daughter to learn about mercy, about second chances, about the kind of person her mother had been, someone who believed people could grow from their mistakes. Marcus took a deep breath. Mr. Whitmore, I appreciate your support more than I can say. But, he glanced at Victoria, seeing not arrogance now but genuine terror and remorse. Everyone deserves a chance to learn and do better. Maybe Ms. Hastings could use this as a teaching moment, not a career-ending one. Perhaps some additional training on customer service and unconscious bias. The silence in the bank was absolute. Victoria stared at Marcus as though seeing him for the first time, her expression transformed by disbelief and dawning gratitude. James studied Marcus for a long moment, then slowly smiled. You're a better man than I am, Marcus Chen. He turned to Victoria. You heard him. Consider this your second chance. I suggest you use it wisely. And Ms. Hastings, I want you to personally ensure that every employee in this bank understands that we serve all customers with equal respect, regardless of how they're dressed or what they do for a living. Yes, sir, Victoria whispered, her voice hoarse. Thank you. And Mr. Chen, I'm truly sorry. There's no excuse for how I treated you. Marcus nodded, accepting the apology with the same grace he approached everything else in life. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in the office of First National Bank's new community outreach program, an initiative funded by both James Whitmore and the bank itself, designed to provide financial literacy and support to working families. Victoria Hastings ran the program, and while their beginning had been rocky, she'd proven herself committed to change, personally apologizing to Marcus 3 more times and working tirelessly to make the program succeed. As Marcus looked out the window at Emma playing in the small park across the street, her yellow dress bright in the sunshine, he felt Sarah's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. He'd kept his promise. Emma's future was secure, college fund established, a new home purchased in a safe neighborhood with good schools, and enough left over to start the community workshop he and Sarah had always dreamed of, where he could teach job skills to others trying to build better lives. But more than that, he'd taught Emma something priceless. That kindness wasn't weakness, that giving second chances could transform lives, and that true wealth had nothing to do with the numbers in your bank account and everything to do with the size of your heart. The torn check, carefully taped back together by Victoria herself, hung framed in the community outreach office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves to be seen for who they truly are.